Becoming a CEO sounds like the fastest path to becoming a millionaire. Status, power, a huge paycheck. But the strange reality is that many millionaires are not CEOs, founders, or entrepreneurs. They're people with completely normal jobs: teachers, engineers, nurses, office workers, people earning ordinary salaries who quietly build million-dollar net worths over time. Meanwhile, many people chasing titles, bigger paychecks, and impressive careers never reach that level of wealth. So, what do these ordinary workers understand about money that others don't? And how can a normal job quietly become one of the most powerful wealth building tools in the world? That's exactly what I'm going to break down today. Most people grow up believing that wealth comes from starting companies or climbing to the top of a corporate ladder. Movies, business podcasts, and social media constantly reinforce the idea that the ultimate financial success story is the founder who builds a startup, sells it for millions, and disappears into a life of freedom. The narrative is powerful because it's exciting. It feels heroic. It promises a dramatic transformation. But the reality of entrepreneurship is much less glamorous than the stories we usually hear. In the United States, roughly 20% of businesses fail within their first year, about 50% close within 5 years, and around 65% shut down within 10 years. Building a successful company requires risk tolerance, capital, timing, resilience, and often a level of uncertainty that many people simply are not comfortable living with for years. And this creates a psychological trap. Many people chase what appears to be the fast path to wealth because it's emotionally stimulating. Humans are naturally drawn to dramatic outcomes rather than slow progress. We love the story of the overnight success. But the uncomfortable truth about building real wealth is that it's usually boring. It requires patience, repetition, systems, and doing the same financially responsible things over and over again for decades. That doesn't make a good movie, but it works. And once you start looking past the flashy stories, something interesting begins to appear in the data. Across the country, there's a group of people who rarely appear in headlines, yet quietly accumulate massive net worth over time. They're what many researchers call the quiet millionaires. The quiet millionaire rarely looks the way people imagine wealth. They're not driving exotic cars or announcing big wins on social media. In fact, most of the time, you wouldn't even notice them. They're teachers, engineers, nurses, accountants, office managers, people with stable careers, predictable incomes, and fairly ordinary lives. This idea was documented extensively in the classic book, The Millionaire Next Door, written by Thomas Stanley and William Danko. After studying thousands of wealthy households in America, the authors discovered something surprising. Many millionaires were not high-income superstars. They were disciplined savers with consistent habits. One example described in the research involved a high school teacher who lived modestly for decades, drove practical cars, and quietly invested part of every paycheck. His colleagues assumed he was simply living a normal middle-class life. What they didn't realize was that for more than 30 years, he had been consistently investing month after month. By the time he retired, those quiet, disciplined decisions had grown into a portfolio worth over $1 million. Another example involved a small plumbing business owner who lived in the same modest house for decades. His neighbors assumed he was middle class. When he passed away, it was revealed that he had accumulated over $1 million in investments simply by saving steadily and investing over time. No flashy startup, no massive inheritance, just decades of consistent behavior. And this pattern showed up again and again. The people quietly building wealth were not necessarily those with the most exciting careers, but those who built systems around their money. Which leads to the next question. If many millionaires are ordinary workers, what is the actual engine behind their wealth? To understand this, it helps to look at the numbers. According to financial data from sources like Credit Suisse and the Federal Reserve, the United States now has over 23 million millionaires, representing roughly 8 to 9% of the adult population. When researchers look closer at how those fortunes were built, a pattern appears. Many were not created through large startup exits or high-profile entrepreneurial success. Most were built through something much quieter: time, consistency, and investing. This is where one of the most powerful forces in finance comes into play: compound growth. Compound growth is what happens when your investments begin generating returns, and those returns themselves begin generating additional returns. Over long periods of time, the effect becomes exponential. For example, someone investing $500 a month into a diversified portfolio, earning around 7 to 8% annually, could accumulate hundreds of thousands of dollars in 30 years and over $1 million over a 40-year career. At first, it barely feels like anything is happening. But year after year, those quiet contributions begin to compound into something most people never expect. Not because they discovered a secret investment, not because they made a single brilliant move, but because they stayed consistent long enough for time to do the heavy lifting. In other words, the real wealth engine isn't a dramatic event, it's a process. But interestingly, there's another reason many high-income professionals fail to build wealth, and it has less to do with how much they earn and more to do with how they live. One of the most misunderstood ideas about wealth is the assumption that a high income automatically leads to financial success. But earning a lot of money and building wealth are two completely different things. In fact, high income often creates its own set of psychological pressures. When people start earning more, expectations rise, lifestyles expand, social comparisons become stronger. There's a constant temptation to upgrade everything: the house, the car, the vacations, the image you project to others. This phenomenon is known as lifestyle inflation, and it's incredibly powerful. A recent show on Prime called Your Friends and Neighbors illustrates this perfectly. The story follows a successful finance professional whose life appears flawless on the outside: beautiful house, high status job, impressive lifestyle. But behind the scenes, the pressure to maintain that image begins to spiral out of control. To sustain the illusion of success, the protagonist eventually turns to criminal behavior, stealing from the very people around him just to keep the appearance of wealth alive. That same psychological pressure shows up everywhere in the real world. People feel compelled to signal success even when it quietly undermines their long-term financial stability. History offers dramatic real-world examples of this mentality taken to extremes. Enron, once considered one of the most innovative companies in America, collapsed after executives secretly manipulated accounting practices to hide billions in losses and maintain the appearance of unstoppable success. Theranos, led by Elizabeth Holmes, promised revolutionary blood testing technology that could diagnose hundreds of conditions from a single drop of blood, a promise that ultimately proved false, leading to one of the largest corporate fraud scandals in modern history. In each case, the pressure to appear successful overshadowed sustainable reality. Now, to be clear, earning a high income is not a bad thing. In fact, it can be incredibly powerful if managed correctly. But without discipline, a large paycheck simply creates a larger spending machine. And that's why many people with impressive careers never accumulate lasting wealth. Meanwhile, the quiet millionaires follow a completely different pattern. When researchers study the habits of long-term wealth builders, a clear pattern begins to emerge. They save consistently, they invest automatically, they avoid unnecessary lifestyle inflation, and they repeat these behaviors for decades. This approach isn't exciting. It doesn't promise instant results. It doesn't go viral on social media. but it works. Many systems that promise rapid financial success turn out to be unreliable at best and outright scams at worst. In contrast, simple financial habits executed consistently over long periods tend to outperform complicated strategies. Automatic investing, living slightly below your means, allowing time and compounding to do the heavy lifting. These habits may appear simple, but psychologically they require patience, emotional discipline, and the ability to ignore the constant noise of quick, rich promises. This mindset closely resembles what Benjamin Graham described in The Intelligent Investor, an investor focused on discipline, long-term thinking, and steady accumulation rather than speculation or excitement. And ironically, the fact that this strategy looks boring is exactly why it works, because while everyone else is chasing dramatic financial breakthroughs, the quiet millionaires are quietly letting time do its work. And this is where normal careers reveal a powerful advantage that many people overlook. A stable career has several advantages that rarely get discussed in conversations about wealth. First, stability creates predictability. A consistent paycheck allows people to build reliable financial systems, automated investments, retirement contributions, and long-term plans. Second, stability creates time. Instead of constantly dealing with the volatility of entrepreneurship, many professionals are able to focus on steady financial progress year after year. Of course, normal jobs have limitations. Income growth can be slower, and scaling earnings can be more difficult than in entrepreneurship. But for millions of people, a stable career combined with disciplined financial habits becomes an incredibly powerful wealth-building foundation. And income doesn't have to remain static either. Over time, people can increase their earning potential through education, new skills, promotions, or strategic career moves. The key insight is this: you don't have to take extreme risks to build wealth. For many people, the quiet path works remarkably well. And if you want to see exactly how this plays out in practice, in the next video, I'm going to break down 5 specific things I did that finally helped me stop wasting my money and start building real financial momentum. Click on the screen and check it out. Do the boring stuff, it works.